For centuries, India was considered by China as a great nation, a part of Buddha's cosmological West, a land of great sages where wealth, ideas, and spirituality were in abundance. It was often called Tianzhu or the Western Treasure Country. China viewed India as a great teacher from where immense amount of knowledge and culture flowed into their lands. Core philosophies of Buddhism as well as establishment of Shaolin Temple occurred during these cultural links with India. However, all these views, which lasted for millennia, changed within a short span of 50 years. This is a story which sowed the seeds of rivalry between two great nations. The story of when India fell in the eyes of China. For 2000 years, despite the Himalayan barriers, two of the world's most ancient civilizations, India and China, coexisted in a state of profound and peaceful respect, exchanging ideas and culture. The Qing dynasty, the Manchu rulers who came to power in China in 1644, looked upon India with a unique reverence. Chinese monks such as Faxian, Xuanzang, and Yi Jing had risked everything to travel the Silk Road to India, seeking wisdom and bring them home. But the Qing viewed the new arrivals from Europe, the Britishers, with deep suspicion. They considered all Western nations, including the Great Britain, as foreign barbarians and as aggressive, uncivilized traders. This view was reinforced by trade itself. The British public had a voracious, insatiable appetite for Chinese goods such as tea, silk, and porcelain. Tea became the national beverage of Britain during this period. By the early 1800s, Britain was importing over 15 million kilograms of Chinese tea every year, alongside vast quantities of silk and porcelain, while exporting negligible amount of items to China. This meant Britain had a massive trade imbalance with China. The Chinese also restricted all foreign trade to a single port of Canton, making it impossible for Britain to expand its exports into China. Since China primarily demanded silver in exchange for its tea and silk, Britain was forced to ship massive amount of silver to China. Britain thus was losing an estimated £2 million annually, a crippling sum at that time. In an attempt to rectify this, King George III decided to send a large diplomatic mission headed by Lord George Macartney to the court of Changlong Emperor. The primary objective of the embassy was to open new multiple ports for British trade beyond the strictly controlled single port of Canton, secure a fixed tariff, and establish a permanent British ambassador in Beijing. The British mission, however, entirely misjudged the Chinese worldview. The Chinese believed in a hierarchical, tributary system where surrounding countries were considered as subordinate nations, offering symbolic gifts or tribute to the Chinese emperor, who ruled all lands and peoples, all under heaven. However, Macartney was negotiating as an equal, dismissing Chinese supremacy. As per popular lore, Chinese expected Macartney to perform the kowtow, a ritual where one kneels and touches their forehead to the ground to show submission to the emperor. Macartney refused the kowtow, instead offering only a deep kneel as he would offer King George III, fundamentally challenging China's claim to the supremacy. Consequently, the embassy failed. The Changlong Emperor firmly rejected all British requests, stating China had no need of their country's manufacturers and had all things necessary within its own borders. To sustain the tea imports without depleting their silver reserves, Britishers had to come up with something new. So they orchestrated the illegal opium trade. The British East India Company, which held a crown-granted monopoly over all British trade with India and China, had systematically conquered most of the Indian territory by 1757. They passed various laws such as Regulation of 1773 and Regulation 6 of 1799, which formally assumed control over all opium production in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa regions of India. They also outlawed private opium farming without their license. This created their monopoly of opium production in India. The company then created debt traps by providing Indian farmers small advances and forcing them to sign contracts to produce opium instead of food crops. Most farmers could not deliver the required quantity of opium as per the contract due to the low artificial prices maintained by the company. Consequently, the debt would be carried over to the next year, often with interest, forcing them to cultivate only opium. Villagers that refused to comply were met with brutal force. This state-sponsored narco enterprise turned India into world's single largest producer of opium. The drug was then shipped from British Calcutta in India, sold to private smugglers, who then, with the help of corrupt officials, flooded the Chinese market with this poison. The supply in China exploded from around 1,000 chests in late 1700s to an estimated staggering 40,000 chests by 1838. The repercussions in China were apocalyptic. The silver that had flowed into China for centuries was now gushing out, destabilizing the economy. Socially, the country was disintegrating. By late 1830s, an estimated 12 million Chinese were enslaved by addiction from opium, from emperor's own court guards to common laborers. This sickness of East was straining China's wealth, health, and spirit. The Chinese emperor Dao Guang was fully cognizant of the situation. He saw that Britain was the drug pusher and tragically India was the source of poison. To counter this, he appointed an imperial commissioner, Ling Zexu, to end the trade. Ling, a man of immense integrity, blockaded the foreign traders in Canton and forced them to surrender their entire stock. In a powerful act of defiance, he destroyed over 20,000 chests of British opium. The British state portrayed the destruction of its drug supply as an act of war. They responded with overwhelming force. But the Qing government in Beijing, who saw themselves as the supreme power of the Middle Kingdom, deeply underestimated the British Empire. China had a decentralized frontier policy. Under this system, the local coastal officials managed disputes independently. However, these officials sent false reports to the emperor, undermining British power, fearing punishment from the emperor, who would see this as officials' failure. This left Chinese forces deeply underprepared. It was a brutal mismatch. Britain's new steam-powered iron gunboats like HMS Nemesis sailed effortlessly up China's rivers. Their modern cannons obliterated ancient Chinese war junk. The conflict concluded with the signing of Treaty of Nanking in 1842, the first of China's unequal treaty, which compelled the Qing dynasty to pay a 21 million silver dollars indemnity, opened 5 ports which included Canton, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo and Shanghai to foreign trade, and ceded the island of Hong Kong to the British. This was followed by a second Opium War in 1856, which arose when Western powers, primarily Britain and France, launched a joint military campaign aiming to secure greater commercial and diplomatic leverage by revising the existing Nanking Treaty of the First War. The war concluded with the signing of Treaty of Xianxin in 1858 and the Convention of Peking in 1860, which forced China to open 11 more ports to foreign trade, permit foreign legation in Beijing, allow foreigners to travel freely in the interior, and most significantly, legalize the importation of opium. Indian soldiers, primarily serving as sepoys in British East India Company's army, were essential to British victory in both First and Second Opium Wars. They constituted a significant portion of British ground forces dispatched from Indian subcontinent, which served as Britain's main military base and logistic hub in Asia. These regiments provided the manpower that augmented the superior British naval power fighting in the lands to seize Chinese coastal cities and forts. These wars marked the beginning of China's century of humiliation. After the war, China's view of India was changed forever. The image of India as a spiritual ancestor was shattered in Chinese eye. Chinese intellectuals and reformers studied the colonial India as a dire warning, a negative example of what China must avoid. They widely condemned India as a fallen and enslaved country that was subjugated virtually without resistance. This powerfully negative narrative was deliberately employed to spur Chinese nationalism, serving as a call to action for compatriots to fight for China's independence against foreign powers. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comment section what story to unravel next.